Okay, so is debt consolidation the same thing as debt settlement? And are there downsides to be aware of these options? Let's find out. Welcome to the Ascend Finance YouTube channel, where we try to help folks understand the pros and cons to debt consolidation and debt settlement. I have spent a lot of time talking to people on the phone and understanding their stories. So with that in mind, I'm finding that there's a lot of people that call debt settlement programs debt consolidation. However, is your debt actually being consolidated in a program like that? The short answer is no, but I'll explain why that's the case in a little bit. Okay, so in today's video, I want to cover a few things, as there's a lot of what seems to be misinformation out there. First, I'm going to talk through the real differences between debt consolidation and debt settlement. Then I want to go through the pros and cons of debt settlement and debt consolidation. And then finally, I'm going to explain something at the end. It's one crucial thing to be aware of that a lot of people don't know. Okay, but before I dive into debt consolidation versus debt settlement, please keep in mind that this video is made for informational purposes only and should not be construed as any kind of legal advice. All right, so let's get into the first thing. So is debt consolidation the same thing as debt settlement? Yes and no, but let me explain why. Real quick though, I'll be actually talking about what these different options are, and I'll reference this free debt options calculator that we actually made for people that want to compare their options, like they're not sure what to do, but they want to understand, okay, what are the different options? How much do they cost? What's the total all-in cost? All of the above. So I'm going to link that in the description. So if you feel like there's an option out there that, I talk about in this video that you're like, oh, that kind of resonates with what I'm going through, and you want to understand what your monthly payment could be, feel free to take the calculator link below. All right, so let's actually go through things now. So to help explain debt consolidation versus debt settlement, let me start with a couple of definitions of debt consolidation. I've actually mentioned these definitions in some of my recent videos, but for those who haven't seen that, let me explain. If you Google what is the definition of debt consolidation, you'll find definitions regarding loans. So for instance, Wikipedia states debt consolidation is a form of debt refinancing that entails taking out one loan to pay off many others. Also, you can see dictionary.com states the combining of several small loans into a single new loan in order to obtain better terms as a lower interest rate, right? So basically you can see a couple definitions. It's clear that debt consolidation is defined with the idea of using a loan to consolidate your debt. So with that in mind, does debt consolidation mean you're getting a loan? Well, technically, I think that's the idea initially. That's why you find a lot of definitions about that. But it's finding that the word is becoming more of a blanket term for basically just combining your debt payments into a single payment. Here's what I mean. Debt settlement companies most of the times don't actually call their programs debt settlement programs, or at least when they're talking to potential clients. They seem to call it a debt consolidation program, or sometimes just debt consolidation. Why would they do that? Well, it's potentially easier for someone to understand that's kind of new to all these options if you just explain it as, oh, it's a consolidation program. But it also seems like it could be used to maybe deceive people of what's really actually happening in these programs. And I mentioned earlier that when you're in these programs, you're not actually consolidating your debt. But now let me kind of dive into why I am saying that. To do that, let's understand what debt consolidation programs, also known as debt settlement, are. In very simple terms, a company is negotiating on past due unsecured debt. So if you're not behind on the debt, then you'll most likely have to stop paying on the debt, let it go 4 to 6 plus months behind, and while you're doing this, make a monthly payment into a special purpose bank account. So folks can have the feeling they're consolidating their debt because they now only have this one monthly payment to make, but there's actually zero debt being consolidated. And I'll actually show a second here a clip of Dave Ramsey explaining what I'm trying to say.
They're not paying the debt right now.
Right.
You know that. You didn't consolidate your debt. You just quit paying it.
Right.
That's all you've done. And they're collecting a check from you, and then every so often as they pile up some of those checks, they use that money to settle one of these debts that have gone bad because you're in default on all of them.
Right.
you've completely trashed your credit.
So with that in mind, it's clear to see that those programs are not actually consolidating your debt. But let me continue with the process. So the point of you making that monthly payment into that special purpose bank account is basically to build up funds so that when your debt accounts are finally at a point where the creditor would be incentivized to settle, the company will just call your creditors to set up settlement agreements, and then they'll pull funds directly out of that special purpose bank account. Alrighty, so now that we kind of understand what debt consolidation is and what debt settlement is, it should be a bit more clear to see how they're actually very different options. One is a loan and one has you fall behind on the debt. So that said, as I mentioned earlier, if you're finding that you're falling behind in the debt, or maybe you're already behind, feel free to take our debt-free debt options calculator. Again, it's linked in the description. It's going to give you the cost estimate, the credit score estimate, and the total all-in cost estimate for all these different options. And that way you can kind of compare things unbiasedly and make the most informed decision. Okay, so now let's dive into the pros and cons of debt settlement and debt consolidation. I'll start with debt settlement. So let's start with the pros. First, you now have a potentially much lower monthly payment compared to what you are paying in your minimum payments. Second, you should, in a sense, save quite a bit of money compared to just paying minimums for the rest of the time until it's paid off. Finally, another pro would be the fact that it's an alternative to bankruptcy. So sometimes you may not qualify for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and sometimes Chapter 13 bankruptcy could be way more expensive, and so it's nice to have an alternative option. Okay, so now let's chat through some of the cons of debt settlement. Well, first, you're putting yourself potentially at risk of being sued. So since we know that the debts need to fall behind in order for the creditor to really have any kind of incentive to settle, you do put yourself at risk of being sued. That's why I'm very much a strong believer in the idea that if you don't see yourself having to fall behind in the first place, then that may be a crucial sign that there may be other options to compare to as well. Okay, second, you may have a tax obligation from this. Ultimately, it may come down to your tax solvency and whether your assets exceed your liabilities, but I'm not a tax specialist, so you may want to ask the debt settlement sales rep if you speak with them. But in short, you may have to count the forgiven debt as income depending on your tax solvency. Okay, third, you may see a significant impact to your credit score. Again, this comes back to my point. If you're not seeing that you're going to have to fall behind on the debt, then it may make sense to look at other options as well. As in this case, if you weren't falling behind, you'd have to voluntarily stop paying, which can have a huge impact to your credit. That said, if you're already behind on the debt, then the actual process of debt settlement may not necessarily hurt your credit score as much. So it's ultimately a con depending on where your debt is at. Okay, finally, you can find yourself paying a lot of money in fees. So this is less of a con, but more of something just to be aware of. Companies are really good at saying the fees are already included in the monthly payment, rather than saying, here are our fees, it's a 25% fee, and it's actually going to be included in what you're paying each month. It kind of feels like a bit of a deceptive sales strategy, as they're not really being clear on how much they're potentially charging their client. So keep in mind, most companies charge between 15 and 25% of your enrolled debt. So that means if you enroll $100,000 of debt into the program and they're charging you a 25% fee, they could potentially make $25,000 if they settle all of your accounts. Okay, of course, that's not all the pros and cons, but those are some I just wanted to make you aware of. Now let's go through the pros and cons of debt consolidation. Let's start with the pros. First, with a consolidation loan, you're now actually paying off revolving debt potentially that it's at a higher interest rate, and you're using a lower interest rate loan to do that. So in short, you're potentially saving money. Next, you have to make one monthly payment now versus all of these minimum payments. So you're actually having a little bit of peace of mind that you only have to worry about one monthly payment. Third, your credit score may go up, since if you have all the debt in credit cards, you're actually moving the debt from a revolving credit to an installment loan, which actually can potentially report better. Okay, those are just a few pros, but let's talk through some of the cons. First, it may not always actually be cost saving for you. I see folks get fixated on qualifying for a consolidation loan, although the rate on the loan is terrible. So to piggyback off of that, for the next con, You may need a good credit rating to actually benefit from a consolidation loan. Another con would be that you're potentially putting yourself at risk of using your credit cards again. Since you're now paying off the credit card debt, you can sometimes be tempted to use those credit cards. Now, of course, you're gonna know yourself best, but I have seen it, so I do wanna lump it as a potential con, depending on you and your situation. Okay, a final con would be that it doesn't actually solve the root issue. So sometimes there's a cash flow issue, and ultimately you may need to either increase income or find a way to significantly reduce your expenses. I found that sometimes people will pay off the debt with a loan so then they can use their credit cards to pay for bills, basically delaying the issue for later. So it's ultimately important to understand, does taking out this loan to consolidate my debt actually solve the root issue at hand? Alrighty, to wrap the video up, I want to talk about something most people may not be aware of. So they're basically called bait and switch mailers. Here's how they work. You get something in the mail telling you that you may pre-qualify for the super low interest rate consolidation loan. On the mailer, it says to call the lender and then provide this unique access code to get the loan. You call them, then you provide them that number, but then they inform you that you don't actually qualify for the loan, but they have something better, this debt consolidation program. So keep in mind, as we learned earlier, debt consolidation program is not where you consolidate your debt. It's where you fall behind on the debt, also known as debt settlement. So that being said, what's happening is that these lenders, pre-qualifying people for loans, are just trying to switch them into their debt settlement program. I wanted to bring this up as there's maybe quite a few people out there that are not aware of this happening, and I just wanted you to know that that is something that may come about if you get one of those mailers. Alrighty, thank you so much for watching. I'll link our free debt options calculator in the description if you want to compare your options and monthly payments. You're always also welcome to call us at 833-272-3631. Thanks so much.